But we're going to start with Jessica Horn, who is two to my right here. Jessica is an international, has delved in women's rights internationally, and she's worked across 18 countries in Africa, and she's also been part of a grant making in support of LGBT organisations. So we're delighted. Thank you very much. And she has a consultancy called Akihi Consulting. So Jessica, thank you very much indeed, and speak to us.
Okay. Yes, sir. Well, greetings to all of you. Thank you very much for the invitation to be a part of this dialogue. I should say two things. One is that I've actually never really engaged it in a formal way in the United Kingdom. Most of my work is in the African region and engaging people in the global south. So I hope where I pitch my comments is correct, because I actually don't know the state of the debate in this country very well. So the second is, I have to say, I approach it with a tremendous amount of trepidation. And it's partly because it's always pitched in such a polarizing way. It's always pitched in that with us or against us, on all sides, though. And I think that that's really, in general, for political debates, always a really unhelpful way of framing things. So what I wanted to do initially, very quickly, is to just give a few sort of foundational points that I use to navigate, to try and think through, and then just have a quick think about how donors can respond. And again, if I'll speak in general terms, but if you want specifics as part of the dialogue, then I'm happy to bring things up there. I think that the first, my first contention that I want to put on the table is that the choice to discriminate on any basis is ultimately always a political one. It's always a political choice to discriminate. And I think when it comes to LGBT rights, sexual orientation and gender identity issues in the global south, in the African region, which is a region I know best, it's a political choice, okay? Political in two senses. Political in the sense of how we are choosing ethically to navigate questions of power and authority and how we manage our collective lives. And political in the sense of party politics, government party politics. In the first sense, I think African activists, in particular feminists, have already made very strongly a documented point that this whole push, this homophobic push, transphobic push, and the push to narrow space around sexual orientation and gender identity is very much part of a broader push to re-entrench heterosexist gender norms. And in a way, it's very much coming as a backlash against our activist success, which was actually to challenge some basic notions of the patriarchal family, issues like marital rape, putting women's economic justice on the table, etc. So it's coming as a backlash against successful African activism to challenge very limited gender norms. And, you know, it's not a surprise then that in the countries where legislation has been tabled, the homophobic legislation has often been tabled alongside legislation that's, for example, policing and criminalizing women's dress codes, further censorship of the use of pornography, and other issues around the sexual and reproductive body. Right? So we always have to kind of expand the debate and have an understanding about what is the broader power dynamics going on. And again, also very much about a broader conservative turn all across the continent, which is very much fueled by the religious right. And I've done action research around understanding the impact of Christian fundamentalisms on women's rights in the African continent, and you can track very clearly how all of that is linked. And again, it's domestic, but it's also transnational in its character. And as was mentioned, the Christian right in the United States in particular has been very active in that. And unfortunately, under the administration of George W. Bush, that was sort of given a lot of money and political weight also by a governmental force. So that's also very much at play. The party political aspect, I think, rarely gets as much analysis, and I think it really needs to. These things have been going on for a while. In 2006, in the midst of the first tabling in Nigeria of a bill that was further criminalizing same-gender relations and same-sex marriage, there was an African activist collective called Uhuru Wazobia, and they put out a statement that was under Obasanjo. And the statement responding to the bill said, "By playing on presumed national homophobia, the bill seeks to divert domestic attention away from other matters. From the looks of the political landscape, it isn't hard to imagine why Nigerians might need some distracting." And they go on to add that gays and lesbians are in effect an easy scapegoat in distressing times. So, you know, African activists are very aware that the issue of LGBT is very much a scapegoating exercise. It's become a kind of fervor, and it's become a popular movement largely through the Christian right mobilization. But it really is a party political ploy. And there's a lot of very complicated dynamics going on in the countries where the legislation has gotten to the point of actually being tabled and passed, etc., that need proper attention. Because again, if we're having a real debate, including about how governments are intervening, you need to understand the party political dynamic behind it. It's not just a question about homophobes and what have you. No, these are tactical political players. They're strategic. They know the stakes are high. They know the stakes are high because there's even trade relations that are, being renegotiated. They know there's a lot to lose, but there's a reason why they're making these official political choices. Again, and I think Kevin also mentioned this, that homophobia is very much a Trojan horse, right? So the legislation is also being used to mask broader efforts by the state to actually criminalize dissent and to silence dissent and dissenters. The criminalization of advocacy that's included in these bills is very smart. The increase of the right for surveillance and censorship also is again very smart, and the criminalization of freedom of association for certain constituencies. So again, there's a lot going on here that is being used, and in a way homophobia is being used very tactically in that domain. The second is that there really is nothing specifically Western about a struggle for equality, justice, and non-discrimination. We have to remember that South Africa, it wasn't a European country, South Africa is the first country in the world to actually include LGBTI in their equality clause of their constitution. Okay, there's a really long, sophisticated tradition of progressive thinking all across the global south, in the African region as well, that includes also a progressive take on sexual orientation and gender identity issues. If we look at the United Nations, let's not forget it was the Brazilian government that was actually the first to push for a resolution in the Human Rights Council, right, in the Human Rights framework. Okay, very quickly then. Should donors fund? I mean, donors already are, so, right? I think the question is probably how. The activism is already resourced and has to be, because activism requires resources to mobilize. It's resourced at community level, and there's a tremendous amount of just personal effort and time and love being put into actually supporting this work. It's being resourced through private philanthropy, both within the context and externally, and it's also more recently being funded by development assistance. And development assistance is very late to the table when it comes to funding. I just want to name like a few quick headlines.
Very quick.
1 minute, okay. All right. In my mind, funding is only an imposition if there's no domestic demand. There is domestic demand. There are movements in every context that are actively working against the homophobia, right? So it's an imposition if you're imposing it onto something that's not there. But there are movements, and we're supposed to be funding the movements. So in my mind, we need to think about what a solidarity-based funding looks like. To me, it's about supporting existing movements, funding existing structures, including existing donor structures, some of which are actually domestically or regionally led, naming the issues the way that people themselves name them and not imposing a discourse onto it, supporting movements and not individuals. And that's a very big problem that we've had with donors, in supporting sort of star individuals and not actually resourcing the organizations and the broader movements that they're a part of. Remembering that it's not just a question of identity. These are economic and social and political struggles, and queer Africans are facing poverty, education, lack of water, healthcare issues, etc. And if we narrow it to identity, it's unhelpful. Okay.
Yep. Jessica, thank you.
And no aid conditionality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay.